Hello Vikram sir, how are you?
Hi Yash, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me here.
How was your day?
So far so good. It's been hectic and you know how it's been.
You are a very difficult person to get on. Thank you very much for joining us today, sir. Can we start by talking about your academic career, like your school days to your PhD?
That's a big answer, but let me, try to squeeze it in. I did my schooling from Kandivali Children's Academy. That probably was the best time that I had. Besides the rigor that the school brought in, created some really fond memories. And that's about 20 years ago. I don't even
What
remember.
board was it?
This was SSC. We didn't have all the other fancy boards that are there now. So there was SSC and there was CBSE. But CBSE wasn't really popular back then. It was predominantly the state board. And after that, I pursued a diploma in industrial electronics. And the idea was simple, become an engineer, get a job. And the safest way to become an engineer was to get a diploma because the parents wanted to be safe. So they said, even if you don't do so well in diploma, you'll get some sort of a job.
Where did you do your diploma?
This was Bhausaheb Vartak Vidyavardhani's Polytechnic in Vasai.
I will act like I know where that is.
Yeah, please do. And then I pursued a bachelor's in electronics and telecommunication engineering from St. Francis Institute
So your
of
base
Technology.
is you're an engineer.
Yes, sir. That's right. And after that, I did my master's and PhD from Cullen College of Engineering at the University of Houston. And that was also in electrical engineering.
When did you start teaching?
In 2003, so I had a 2-year stint of teaching at Thakur College of Engineering, 2 years. And after that, I pursued the master's and PhD. I came back in 2012, started teaching again for 4 years. That's when I got involved in the student entrepreneurship program. And since then, I have been promoting entrepreneurship for about 10 years now.
Is it not crazy going from teaching in Thakur to Cullen?
It didn't make any sense, but now that I look back at it, it was a logical step. Because what had happened was I was teaching and then I had hit a point of stagnation. And I was pretty sure that I did not want to join in the IT bandwagon at that time, which had literally picked up. And then the logical move for me was to get a PhD and then be in teaching and pursue research. The only illogical thing that I have done, I believe, is not pursue research, but pursue entrepreneurship. But other than that, it just fit well.
Did you always plan on doing a PhD or was that a later on decision in your
No,
life?
that was very much on the cards for me. So much so that one of the cupboards that I still have in my place, the inside of the cupboard, the inside of the door has a printout which says Master's so-and-so year, PhD so-and-so year, job so-and-so year. Literally, there is a progression that I had written.
When did you decide this?
This I decided while I was doing the bachelor's program. So I would peg it anywhere between 2000 and 2003. I don't remember when it was, but those 3 years.
Would you recommend everyone who is pursuing like something like an MBA to do a PhD?
The answer is both yes and no. The reason is PhD requires a certain mindset. I mean, a common perception among people is that, you have to be super smart or super brilliant to pursue a PhD. That really is not the case. You just have to be, persistent. There are going to be times that you wouldn't know what you're doing. And you're lost. Most of the time you're lost. It's like you are given a quiver. There is a bullseye somewhere in the room. You're thrown in the room. The lights are switched off. It is pitch dark. And the task is hit the bullseye. As many shots as you want to take. And somewhere down the line, you hit somewhere closer to the bullseye, not really on it, and then it just works. So it doesn't take a lot of intelligence or, something genetic to get into PhD and get it done. It's how far you're willing to push yourself and eventually the knowledge that is out there. So that's what it takes. Now, Do I recommend it? Yes, if you are of this personality and your objective in life is to create knowledge, right? But if your objective is to get into some sort of a hustle and make a lot of money, in that case, you go the corporate way and not worry about PhD.
Was there a point in your life where you were like, let engineering like not bother me anymore and I'll switch to entrepreneurship?
It wasn't really an instance. It was more like it was a smooth transition for me because I completed PhD, got into teaching again at St. Francis. And one of the things that happened during my PhD was, so PhD is doctorate in philosophy,
Yes.
doctorate of philosophy in whatever subject. So the reason that there is the word philosophy in it, because during that period, you become a lot more philosophical. And one of the questions that I asked was literally, who am I? The classic question. What am I doing? And why am I doing?
Is that a common question with anyone doing PhD?
Oh, it's an existential crisis. Okay, so you literally end up asking such questions. Why is this happening to me? Because you see a lot of friends of yours, they graduate, they get into the Microsofts and the Googles and they start earning like crazy. And here you are at the bottom of the pyramid of earning, wondering what is happening in life. So yes, these are common questions. And at that time, I sort of, figured out that any institute, any academic institute, in my opinion, has 3 tasks. The first one is knowledge creation. The second is knowledge distribution. The third is knowledge commercialization. And an institute has to pick up any 2 of these and has to excel in it. If it's not doing that, then there is some problem. And I chose to move with distribution and commercialization. And that's why when I got into teaching, I got involved in the entrepreneurship related activities, and then it just blossomed for me.
Has teaching always been a soft spot, or was this on the plan ki I'll be a teacher someday?
Actually not. And in fact, I was an absolutely bad teacher in my first job. So much so that I used to shiver and my entire body would sweat. And when I walked away from the class, it would be like, thank God I'm done. Right? So it was definitely not on the cards. In fact, I chose teaching because I did not want to get into IT industry.
Okay.
So teaching was not even on the cards. It just happened.
So you started teaching an engineering related subject or directly like a business subject?
Oh yeah. No. So I started with engineering subjects, and the funny thing was, so I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but in cricket, the new person who walks in gets to field at the short leg.
Yes.
Right? Because they are the juniors.
Yes.
And that's a very scary position to play at, right? Because it's high risk. And so this is exactly what happened. My first job, we are doing the load allocation or the distribution of the courses. And the only course that is left untouched is electromagnetics. And the head of the department looks at me and says, "What? You have to." And fortunately for me, that is an area that was of my interest, so I ran with it.
What is the difference between teaching here in Mumbai than Houston?
One big difference is attendance. Okay, so whatever courses that I taught, I mean, it's not that I taught a whole semester, but there were sessions that we had to take, and in most of the classes, most of the faculty for whom I taught, they didn't bother about attendance. I mean, the objective was simple. Students are mature. You are in class. You want to learn, and I'm going to give you the information that you want. So it's your responsibility to pick it up, not mine to, sort of take. And that's one big difference that I see in colleges across Mumbai. So I've taught in St. Francis, I've taught in Symbiosis, in Thakur College of Engineering, and now in Atlas.
This problem is getting worse and worse. So my generation, like my batch, everyone, at least in school, everyone used to come. Like the worst attendance in the class would have been like someone with an 80%. right now, the younger generation, no one's going to school. They're like, I am learning nothing new.
See, that's got to do with the availability and accessibility of information, right? So, I mean, pick up any course of yours. I think it would be available for free on YouTube,
Yeah.
right? Or any of the channels. You go to Udemy, they'll charge you maybe 500 a pop, and you have the entire MBA. But that's not how it works, right? And the way I see my role, I wouldn't claim it as a general faculty role. The way I see my role is, I have seen the world slightly more than you. Okay, maybe you are exposed to a lot more things than I am in terms of technology, right? The kind of things that you guys see and do definitely far outweigh than what I have done. But I have seen more battles than you have. Just the fact that I've been pushing myself literally in difficult situations. Now, those situations are agnostic of any technology. It's just situations, right? And that is what I bring to the class. And as a faculty, it's not just the course that I'm teaching you, but this is the structured way of looking at things, the kind of discussions that I do, the kind of activities that I bring to class, and the question answers, the sort of, sometimes it even turns into a debate, right? So these are the things that should happen in a class, and students can pick up a great value from this. I mean, you could go on YouTube and just sit there for 1 hour and learn everything. I'm totally with you on that.
At what time did you stop teaching and started with your first startup?
In fact, my first business was concurrent with my employment.
How many businesses have you had?
2.5. So the reason I say half, because one of the business was just an experiment. I never thought of it as a startup which I would register and do things. It was more or less
Hustle.
A hustle. And my objective in that was to learn digital marketing. But the other two businesses were quite serious. One was my first business, in fact, probably first in my family, so to say. It was a home service salon. So the idea was to send beauty experts at home. And back then, no one was even talking about it.
What year is this?
This was 2013 and 14 probably. 14. And between 14 and 15, we did... my years could be off, but that's the area between 2014 to 17. That's the time frame. And I committed a lot of mistakes. My team committed a lot of mistakes, and then eventually we had to shut it down. But later on, we realized that one such service was actually acquired by one of the top chains, top salon chains, and for a very handsome amount. So that's when we realized that we had a good problem to solve, but the execution was really, really bad. Right. So that was the first one. The second serious business that me and my wife got into.
Ninsar Agritech.
Ninsar Agritech, that's right. And this was the one where both of us, we committed everything into it. We resigned from our jobs. We moved from Mumbai to Pune. I got a Department of Science and Technology fellowship from the Government of India. So it was very serious. But again, we too many errors. And this time, despite committing all resources, we could have overcome those errors as well. But then COVID happened, which amplified it 10,000 times. And there was no coming back from that.
What were you doing with Ninsar Agritech?
That company was formed to help farmers perform soil testing on the farm and get results within 15 minutes, which now takes anywhere between 15 days to, whatever.
So you're giving it on the spot?
On the spot, yeah.
So, did you learn more from losing in startups, or you have one right now with something FirstCry you were talking about?
Yeah. We learned a lot because of our failures, definitely. But the business that you're talking about is actually my wife reviving Ninsar Agritech with a changed focus and us being a little mature about it. So we are taking it slow. We are not getting into the, hey, let's scale up the business in 2 years and, let's get to $1 billion valuation. We are not doing that. We are not chasing that. We are building a strong business slowly and steady.
What advice would you give to younger future coming entrepreneurs that not to make?
The first thing that I think students, specifically students, all right. So early stage has two parts. One is students and the other is anybody, To students, I strongly recommend that learn marketing and selling. You got to learn that. While in college, I don't care what you sell. You want to sell a vada pav, a pencil, a chair, or a table? Just do that. Okay. Figure out that code which will enable you to market anything. Because see, once I know how to market the spot, I know what it takes to create a marketing campaign. Right? Once that is done, I take the spot and I sell it. I know what it takes to actually go and complete that sale. And once you get these two skills, you can market yourself, you can sell yourself or any other product that you bring to the table.
So you are a LinkedIn guru.
I wouldn't call myself that.
I would call you a LinkedIn guru, sir. Every post, sir, I have your notifications on. Every post you post, it is actually inspiring.
No, thank you very much. But I definitely am not a LinkedIn guru. I just found my ikigai with LinkedIn. Because I've tried a YouTube channel, I tried Instagram, I tried a Facebook page, and what else is there? Yeah, I think those are the three and Pinterest as well, yeah. But none of these really struck a chord with me. I like to write, and I think LinkedIn very recently became a creator platform. Right? I've been on LinkedIn since whenever it started, but they decided to become a creator platform recently. I got to know about that in 2022, and since then, I just decided to write. So that's what it is.
You told me your passion is AIC, your Atal Incubation Center.
Yeah.
What do you do there?
So, my passion, or rather, is helping early stage or first-time business or first-time folks who want to start a business. Right? I just want to ensure that we have fewer failures. I mean, the only thing that I actually help is don't do this mistake. It's a mistake. Don't do this. And that is what I want to do. And at Atal Incubation Center, Rambao, Margi, Prabodhini, I'm a mentor and my focus areas are agri-tech businesses, IoT kind of businesses. And typically, so I am most likely I'm going to mentor one startup which is an agri-tech. And these are young folks who want to get into the agri-tech business. Again, they are engineers who want to get into agriculture. A similar story. So I'm trying to help them and, again, avoid the same mistakes that we did.
Do you think AI will help incline startups or it will decline?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
So with the help of AI, will there be more startups? Like, will it help startups or AI ke wajah se startups will stop? Like,
okay. So let me tell you something. Again, a personal opinion. Right now, everyone is talking about AI.
Yeah.
But there are very few people who actually understand what this is about. So this is a huge transition that we are going through. It will stabilize at some point of time, right? And at that point, it will be like any other technology. Definitely, this is an inflection point in the human history. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. But here is what is going to happen. You cannot build an AI business. You build a business and then leverage AI to make it leaner, faster, cheaper, or more cost beneficial in general. Right? So that's the general idea. Now, a company like, let's say, OpenAI, that's a completely different ballgame. Right? But companies like, let's say, Perplexity or, Tesla for that matter, which uses AI, they first solved a problem and then brought in AI to just become much better at what they were doing. Right? So that's my perspective. Agri-tech has got humongous applications or the need for AI to come in. But is India ready for it? Because historically we haven't collected a lot of data. Whatever we have collected is not clean. So there is going to be sort of a upward or a very steep curve which we have to climb before AI becomes useful in agri-tech. Right? So similar thing is going to happen in other domains as well. And then we can talk about whether AI is going to help startups or AI is going to cause decline. And my opinion is, it depends on the individual. All right? AI is a technology. How you use it and how you ride that wave will define whether you will go up or down.
What are your thoughts on India on this AI race?
So I like the way we are positioned, because if you think about it, again, historically, when we were colonized, we missed the entire industrial revolution. Right? We just lost it. I mean, there was nothing. We were barely figuring out how to find food for the next day. Then comes the next epoch, which is the IT revolution. We were slightly late, but we rapidly picked it up. The adoption of TVs, computers, internet was massive. And now, here we are at the point of AI. The gap between us and other countries is marginal right now. Right? Excuse me. What that tells me is that we are very swiftly going to adopt AI much faster than anybody else. And the beauty is that the economy is actually designed to absorb all of this. Because if you contrast this with Europe, Europe is going through weird transition right now because their policymakers are not making it easy for the adoption of AI or startups in general. Whereas our economy is just embracing this.
No, but India is also somewhat doing this. They recently passed a law where if an individual wants to launch an AI platform, they need government permission for that.
But that's a good thing, right? I mean, I'll tell you why that is a good thing. For example, drones, right? So drone and AI are recent examples. Drones just came in. We didn't have any policy around it. The government created a policy around it which was favorable, right? Now, suddenly, this AI thing is picking up and the government is right now curbing it. But I'll tell you what, very soon there will be a policy which will be in favor for companies to do some amazing work around it. Because see, government's responsibility, top responsibility is their citizens' security. Then comes the profitability of a company. The moment government says, the company should become profitable, we don't know what's going to happen with the common citizen. Right? So which is why this curbing, then policy development and policy deployment. Right? So these things will happen. Earlier, it used to take a lot of time to do this. Now it's much faster. That's the only difference that I see.
Are there any books or movies you would like to recommend our viewers to start a business?
There are quite a few movies, but one of my favorites is the movie called Founder. The Founder, I think. It's
the McDonald's story.
The McDonald's story. I love that movie. Because it is like a movie, so it's not a documentary. So there's that fun and entertainment element. But the way they have presented facts and the story that comes out, it's brilliant. Right? So I would definitely recommend watching that movie. But and in terms of books, yes, there are quite a few books that you could read. But honestly, I feel that you should act. Like I said, go sell a vada pav. Right? Go sell a pencil. You can read whatever you want. You can watch whatever movies and motivation and YouTubes and all those things. But nothing can replace that hustle on the road.
Main thing is take action.
Take action. Go sell. Figure it out. Right? We started a business and then later realized, there is something called a product market fit. I didn't even know what people used to talk around me. PMF hua kya? PMF hua kya? What is PMF? Right? Much later, then I got to know there's something called Reforge. There are articles. You read this, you read that. Now, as an academic, my thoughts are far more structured because I've read and I've done. But if you ask me, do first, learn later.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.